Hello and welcome to Lantern Lane Stories. Tonight's story is Rusiñol's Two Fishermen's Huts. The long ago, in the big, busy city of Barcelona, there lived a boy named Santiago. His full name was Santiago Rusiñol y Prats, and he came from a rich family. His grandfather owned a large cotton factory. The machines were loud and clanking, and they spun thread from morning until night. White cotton fluff drifted through the air like tiny snowflakes that never melted. One day, his grandfather said, resting a hand on Santiago's shoulder, "All of this will be yours." He swept his arm wide, showing Santiago the tall machines and the stone walls and the busy workers. Santiago sneezed from the cotton fluff. "Thank you, grandfather," he said quietly, but his eyes drifted to the window. He was watching the way the afternoon light fell in long, thin stripes across the factory floor. That evening, Santiago sat by the window of his room with his sketchbook on his knee. His fingers were already dark with charcoal. He drew the light on the stone. He drew the roof of the building across the street. He drew and drew until his candle burned down to nothing. Artists are just dreamers, people told him. Learn the family business. Others said, that is what matters. Santiago shook his head. He packed his bags, tucked his sketchbook under his arm, and walked away from the factory. He was going to be a painter. In the autumn of 1891, he arrived in a small coastal town called Sitges. He stepped off the train and stopped. The air was warm and smelled of salt and something sweet, like old roses drying in the sun. White walls glowed in the afternoon light. The sea stretched out beyond the houses. A deep blue-green, very still and very wide somewhere nearby. A church bell rang slowly. Once this place. Santiago said softly, to no one in particular, already looks like a painting. He walked down to the beach. The sand was pale gold. Fishing nets hung in long loops over wooden posts. Old men sat in the shade and mended boats with slow, careful hands. Santiago sat on a low stone wall and opened his sketchbook. He stayed for a few months, then he went back to Barcelona, but he could not stop thinking about Sitges. That wide, still sea kept appearing in his daydreams. Those white walls kept showing up in his sketches. He returned the following summer, and the summer after that, each time Sitges felt a little more like home. In the spring of 1893, Santiago walked down to the edge of the sea in Sitges. He was in the Sant Joan neighborhood, where the houses sat so close to the water that you could hear the waves from the doorstep. Two small fishermen's houses stood side by side. Their walls were thick stone, the color of old sand. Their wooden shutters had faded to a pale gray. A salty wind blew steadily off the water. A cat stepped carefully across the roof tiles, then slipped behind a chimney and disappeared. No one had lived in these houses for a very long time. Santiago walked up close. He pressed his hand flat against the wall. The stone was warm from the sun. He could hear the waves breaking, soft and steady, just a few steps away. "These houses," he said quietly, "will become my studio." But buying the first house was not the last person who had owned it was an old woman. She had died many years before in her will. She had written something unusual. She had left the house to God. She wanted the money from the sale to pay for prayers for her family in heaven. This meant Santiago could not simply walk in and buy it like any ordinary house. He had to ask a church for special permission. He wrote letters. He waited on warm evenings. He walked past the empty houses and looked at them through the fading light. He imagined what they could become. Finally, on the 30th of July, 1893, the church agreed. Santiago paid 1,000 pesetas. He counted the coins carefully, stacking them into neat, patient columns on a table. Then he looked up and let out a long breath. He laughed. The first house was his. Not long after, he bought the house next door as well. Now he had two old fishermen's houses standing side by side at the edge of the sea, waiting to become something new. The Santiago hired an architect named Francesc and a team of builders. They gathered around the two houses and made a plan. "Take down that wall," Santiago said, pointing to the thick stone wall between the two cottages. The workers swung their hammers. Dust and old plaster flew into the air. Light burst through where the wall had been. The two small, separate, dark houses became one wide, bright space full of sea air and sunshine. Then Santiago had another idea. He had heard that an old building nearby was being torn down. Inside it were some beautiful Gothic windows with pointed arches at the top, the kind you see in old castles and ancient churches. "I want those windows," he said. The workers lifted them carefully and carried them to the new studio. When they set them into the fresh wall, sea light poured through the pointed arches and lay on the stone floor in long, warm, golden pools. Santiago stood very still and watched the light. Then he smiled and got to work. He filled every corner of his new home with things that mattered to him. Twisted iron candlesticks, each one bent into its own clever shape, painted ceramic tiles in shades of blue and white and deep green, like the sea just outside. Old Wooden furniture worn smooth by many years of use, cafe after canvas propped against the walls waiting to be painted. He called his new home Cau Ferrat. In the old Catalan language, Cau means a den, a cozy, quiet hiding place like an animal's safe cave. Ferrat means iron, the iron den. People in Sitges raised an eyebrow when they heard the name. A strange name for a house, they said to each other, but they smiled when they said it. Wood spread through Barcelona quickly. Santiago has a studio in Sitges right by the water, and it is wonderful. His friends came to see Ramon Casas arrive with 2 rolled-up canvases tucked under his arms. He was a painter, and one of Santiago's oldest friends, Miguel Uchido, came soon after, laughing and shaking sand off his shoes at the door. More friends followed, poets, musicians, writers who loved art. The little iron door was always opening and closing. Inside, the smell of paint and turpentine mixed with the cool salt smell of the sea. People sat on wooden chairs and on the stone floor. They talked about colors and light and what art was for. They cooked simple meals together in the evenings. They ate and laughed as the sun turned orange over the water outside. This, Santiago said one evening, looking around at his friends, is what a home should be. Everyone nodded. One autumn, Santiago made a long journey all the way to Paris. In a shop there, he found 2 very old paintings that almost no one in Spain remembered. They were made by a painter called El Greco, who had lived 300 years before El Greco was born on a Greek island. But he came to Spain to paint. His pictures showed faces with long, still, searching eyes, as if they were listening to something very far away. These paintings have been away from Spain too long. Santiago said he bought them and carefully brought them back to Sitges. Then he planned something that had never been done before. On the 4th of November 1894, a brass band gathered in the narrow street outside Cau Ferrat. The musicians wore dark jackets. Their brass instruments caught the pale morning light. Men on horseback rode at the front. Their boots polished to a high shine, the people of Sitges came out of their houses to see what was happening. Children wriggled to the front of the crowd. Santiago and his friends held the 2 El Greco paintings high above their heads. They began to walk slowly through the cobblestone streets of Sitges. The music rang out. Bright and warm, between the white walls, lanterns swayed gently in the sea breeze. The painted faces in the pictures seemed to float above the crowd. El Greco walks in Sitges. Tonight, someone called out. The crowd cheered. At the procession reached the iron door of Cau Ferrat. The 2 paintings were carried carefully inside and hung on the stone walls. El Greco had come home. Art must never be forgotten, Santiago said quietly as the music faded and the evening grew still. The years passed, one after another. More paintings arrived at Cau Ferrat. A young artist named Pablo Picasso came to visit and left some of his drawings on the walls. Every year, festivals filled the streets of Sitges with music and dancing and new paintings to see. Painters came from Barcelona and Paris and other cities across Europe to walk through the iron door. Santiago grew older, his dark hair turned gray, his hands were always a little stained with paint. He kept painting and writing until he was very old indeed. He died in a town called Aranjuez, far from the sea, in the year 1931. But before he died, he made one last very important decision. He gave Cau Ferrat to the town of Sitges. Every painting on the walls, every twisted iron candlestick, every pointed Gothic window, every piece of old ceramic tile, everything, a gift to the people to be kept and shared for as long as Sitges stood. 2 years later, in 1933, the iron door swung open for everyone. Families walked in together. Children looked up at El Greco's long, still faces on the tall walls. They stood at the Gothic windows and watched the sea move far below today. If you go to Sitges and walk along Sant Sebastià beach, you will see it, a blue and white house right at the edge of the water. Inside, those same old Gothic windows still let the same golden light fall on the same stone floor. The paintings still hang on the walls, and above the door, the name Cau Ferrat is still there, just as Santiago wrote it. And so Sitges also slowly fell asleep. Good night.